This isn't like a Luigi Mangione or something like that. It's just like a guy who believed wholeheartedly that his life was destroyed, not by Abe directly, but by a religious organization that Abe was publicly supporting. And, the line wasn't political in the traditional sense. It was kind of personal. But it did have deep political implications, of course, right? So Yamagami, he didn't try to kill Abe because he didn't like his policies. He wasn't angry about taxes or anything like that. He was angry at the Unification Church, right? And in Japan, it's known as the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, but that's just too long of a word. So we're going to go with the Unification Church here. But like the real story here is that the backstory is that his mom was like a devout follower of the Unification Church and had donated nearly everything that they had. It was over 100 million yen, or close to $1 million US bucks over the years. And, their family eventually was financially ruined. Yamagami's father had died by suicide. His brother apparently got sick and passed away, probably completely unrelated to the Unification Church, but probably not having any money can't help that situation. Yamagami ends up dropping out of college. He worked a bunch of dead-end jobs. He joined the military for a little while. And, his just life was just, not anything really, it was just kind of a background noise, and at first, you probably like ask a question like, okay, well, if he was so mad at the Unification Church, why didn't he go after the Unification Church? Like he tried, but he couldn't reach them. I mean, their upper echelon, it's honestly pretty similar to, Scientologists. Like, do you know the leaders of the Church of Scientology? I sure don't, right? And even if he did, good luck getting to him,
Well, Tom Cruise?
No. Yeah. He's just
that's one of the leaders.
He's not a leader. The church. He's just a high.
What are you talking about,
he's
man?
A high
he has
profile.
His own like
he's a high profile.
He's like his own. He has his own slave caste, and yeah, the leader is David Miscavige.
Okay. Can you get? Do
and
you
I
have
know
access
that because
to
I watched the doc. I don't have access to him, but
yeah, exactly.
At least I know who he is. Yeah. David Miscavige. And then before that, it was L. Ron Hubbard. I think it was.
That's who started it,
in between.
For sure.
Well, I don't know if there was someone who preceded him before L. Ron Hubbard, but L. Ron Hubbard was obviously
he wrote Dianetics. He's the guy. He's like the progenitor. He's the Joseph Smith, but now we're crossing into the Book of Mormon. I guess, so the point though is that they were the people who ran the Unification Church, or who run still to this day the Unification Church, are very like protected class citizens, right? They're not like plebeians, don't have access to these people. And, then one day he sees Shinzo Abe, and he's, standing in this video message in 2021, praising the church's like affiliated group for its peace efforts. And that was it. Like, that's what made him snap. He was like, look at this guy, fucking prime minister or former prime minister of Japan. He should know better. These people are lying snakes, and look at how he's just openly supporting this like evil, church that stole my family from me. Basically, this is how he's thinking about the situation, And at that point, he just decided, he was like, I got to kill Shinzo Abe. I'm going to send a message to this church through Shinzo Abe because, how dare this guy support this evil church, And, it was kind of a vengeance killing, right? But it wasn't a vengeance like because Shinzo Abe did something specifically bad to him. It was because he had this connection to the Unification Church. And the Unification Church has a long history of maintaining close ties to Japanese conservatives because they're useful. The Unification Church mobilizes voters. They preach anti-communism, which is like a core tenet of the LDL. And, they give like this like spiritual veneer to, the same political ideologies that the LDL, put forward. And the price of that ship between the Unification Church and the LDL is that, regular people get hurt, and no one, there's little to no scrutiny that gets placed on the church because they're protected. Until, of course, this guy decides to build a gun and shoot Shinzo Abe,
Well, it's a lot to unpack. And let's start with the obvious. What is the Unification Church?
So again, it's known as the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. So that's probably gonna be the last time I'm saying that because it's a stupid name. It was founded in 1954 in South Korea by a guy named Sung Young Moon, who said that Jesus personally commanded him to finish Jesus's mission. And Moon claimed that he was the literal Messiah, not like a symbolic one, like he was actually the Messiah. And him and his wife were they called themselves the quote unquote true parents that were meant to cleanse humanity through their marriage and sacrifice and also total obedience. And on the surface, the church, it blended, a lot of Christianity, some Korean spiritualism, and definitely a whole lot of like apocalyptic, like nationalist ideology. But behind that kind of facade, there was a pretty big international network that was built up through, shell companies and businesses and media and real estate and of course, heavy donations. They became incredibly wealthy by tapping into their followers, wallets basically. And, it spread to Japan. And in Japan, the fundraising became extremely coercive, right? The followers in Japan were urged, extremely pressured to basically give everything they had. They put a lot of like this spiritual guilt on them. Some of them lost their entire savings. In the case of Yamagami, he's lost some members of his family as an indirect result of it. But a lot of people were ruined financially from it. And it keeps happening quietly. And nobody in the government is really doing anything or caring because Japan, even though Japan is largely secular, Japan becomes a major source of income for the church. And, Moon basically thought that Japan owed a spiritual debt to Korea because of, the atrocious shit that Japan did to them, in the many wars before that. But, basically they were milking the Japanese for everything they got. And the church quickly gained a lot of money and a lot of political access through its base in this anti-communist stance during the Cold War. Pretty much at this time, almost all over the world, if you had like an organization or a platform and you were preaching anti-communist something, you became mainstream pretty quick, and this was one of those many examples. And so in Japan, this made them very strong allies of the Liberal Democratic Party, which we had mentioned has been in power pretty much perpetually for several decades, and especially popular among their right-wing factions. And they were politically useful. Like I said, they mobilized grassroots supporters. They campaigned for LDL candidates. They pushed for conservative family values, which was very popular, among the conservative parties in Japan. And as time goes on, they got real close with the politicians. They co-hosted events. They give speeches for one another. They make these connections, and some politicians are smart and they try to keep their distance, but a lot of them just kind of welcome this partnership because it's politically expedient, As a matter of fact, Shinzo Abe's grandfather, Nobusuke Kishi, he was an early political ally of the church, and Kishi was actually once a war criminal, and he then became the Prime Minister of Japan. And he was real interested in Moon's anti-communist ideology, and so they became friends somehow. And that alliance has persisted for generations. Now, while Shinzo Abe himself has never officially part of the church, he has sent, video messages to their events and has been generally, publicly sympathetic, I want to say, or like, cool with them. And so when, Yamagami over here looks at Abe, he's not looking at a politician here. He's seeing a powerful symbol, he's seeing like some guy who has a lot of power and who's promoting the Unification Church's, evil. And he felt that this was the right move. He had to stop Abe. That's how he felt.
So Was this so? The Unification Church was a cult.
Yeah,
and I understand that Japan has this cult problem. I don't know if this is like strictly a Japanese thing, or if it's something that's like in East Asian culture. There seems to be, if you look at like East like culture, and like there seems to be like a lot of like messianic type figures. So like just like Mao, for example, he transcended being just a head of state.
Yeah.
Like, he was essentially like a god. Kim Sung, why can't I think
Kim
of the
Il-sung?
original? He was a this kind of cult personality. Right. Ho Chi Minh. It's interesting. I don't know if there's something to that or not, but there seems to be like a lot of like these kind of messianic type figures in East Asian history.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? I'm not sure if that's like the truth or not, but I can think of like several like cults.
You can think of a lot. Yeah. You can think of a lot of like super charismatic leaders in East Asia,
and just also straight up cults. Like Japan kind of has a cult problem. Like there's a bunch of them.
Yeah,
but this one's
they're not like malicious.
Yeah, they're not. But, it's different from what we would think of as like a cult, right? It's not like this weird like Satanist, dark robes, rituals, bullshit. They often just look like slightly strange like Christian organizations or like a religious organization, and they have these little temples and sermons, and importantly, they also have like, whatever the Japanese equivalent of a 501c3 is, like they have legal protections, and yeah.
Well, they'll do something like they'll worship the trees, or something, or they'll worship the forest or Mount Fuji,
right?
And it won't be anything nefarious, but they're just very, very intense about it,
right? And they're very coercive, and they love extracting money from their members. That's huge.
Here's something that to think about. So Japan was extremely brutal towards Christians in the 16th century, when during the time of the shogunate, like they burnt down churches, they massacred Christians, very, very brutal towards Christians. You wonder, I'm not making a judgment here, but you wonder if they took such harsh measures on Christianity because they adopted that type of attitude towards it.
Yeah.
But you wonder if like the Christians of Japan were just like super intense and like cult-like, and that's why they were brutalized. I'd have to read more about that.
Yeah, like what were
the subject, but it's
what were early Japanese Christians like? My favorite Japanese Christian story is like this is total segue, but I'm sure you've heard of like the theory that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross, that that was his brother, and they put his brother on the cross, and that he actually escaped, and he went all the way across Asia and then crossed the sea and the Sea of Japan, and ended up in Japan and became like a rice farmer or some shit, and now they have a grave for Jesus, for Japanese Jesus, in Japan somewhere over there, and it's just so wild, like I mean, I don't mean to belittle their religion or their belief systems or anything like that, but it's funny how they need to have that like direct connection to their deity, such that they'll go through the lengths of claiming that this was the case. And I mean, to the extent that Jesus was a real human being, it's a little bit of a stretch for him to have moved, 2,000 years ago from what is now known as Israel to what is now known as Japan. I don't know. That just seems like a huge, huge fucking stretch,
Well, in the Book of Mormon, weren't the early Israelites from
the Nephites and the whatever?
The Nephites?
Yeah, no, they were just like a different breed of Israelites, and who knows how the fuck they got there, right? Like took a boat, I guess. Like I don't know. Again, it's just like such a stretch to think about. Like again, I don't mean to belittle people's belief systems. Y'all believe whatever you want. I believe in aliens sometimes, so I could see how people would think about some strange ideas like this. Anyway, where are we? I'm getting totally lost going down a weird rabbit hole. Unification Church, widely called a cult by their ex-members and by lawyers and a bunch of watchdog groups in Japan and of course in South Korea too. And a lot of legal experts were, debating about like how should they label the Unification Church. But like, the group's behavior fits the mold of a cult. It isolates its members from its loved ones. It pressures them to give a shit tons of money, under these like threats and it does mass weddings, right? Like it arranges those domestic partnerships, and it's obviously above all it enforces a strict obedience and venerance of its quote unquote divine founders. It's just the classic high control group behavior, right? So this cult problem starts, exploding into public view in the 90s. And one group called Aum Shinrikyo, and they were behind the 1995 Tokyo subway sarin gas attack. They began as like a doomsday sect that blended a lot of like Buddhist and Hindu ideas together, and organization's end was just chemical weapons and a lot of people dead in a subway. Then after Aum, people started paying more attention to the idea that there could be these pseudo-religious cults that are potentially dangerous to the public. None of the laws really changed at all. I mean, Japan's post-war constitution, for better or for worse, it gives total religious freedom in Japan. Article 20 is written so strictly that it leaves almost no room for interference from the government. And what that means is that, it makes the Japanese government hesitant to go after even the most abusive of these religious groups because of the way that their laws are written. Religious freedom is like enshrined, pun intended. You know what I mean? And so, then you talk about a culture that, that prioritizes like keeping your mouth shut and don't shame your family, don't air your dirty laundry. And now suddenly you have a recipe for potential abuse from these organizations. In Japan, there's, you could be spiritually, eccentric, and that's tolerated or mostly ignored, but, groups like the Unification Church, they use that to their advantage. They put their beliefs around familiar cultural symbols, and, they talk about the things that you want to hear or that are, politically expedient, like family and purity and peace and stuff like that. They're not like, they don't give, crazy. they're pretty normal looking from the outside, but behind those closed doors, it's a different story. A lot of people are hurt by organizations like the Family Unification Church. So ultimately, to get back to our original story, when Yamagami pulls this trigger, he's not just targeting Shinzo Abe. He thought that he was helping to expose like this entire hidden system that, this political party had been working with and partnering with by killing Shinzo Abe. And so it kind of worked.
Yeah. So going back to the Scientology comparison. Mm-hmm. So imagine this scenario if let's say Trump or any president, Obama or Biden, was just like super, super friendly with Scientology.
Right.
And he was in like promotional videos of Scientology, like, hey, these are great people. Go by and get your
thetan levels read
tested, or
yeah.
Your thetan levels read, or
yeah,
I got it. Seems like I've spent too many years in the Oval Office. Stress has overtaken me.
Yeah.
So it'd be like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean that and that comparison to Scientology isn't just fair. It's kind of like pretty accurate, and I kind of think about how this felt in Japan. If you think of Scientology in the U.S., not because they have similar belief systems, but because of how they operate, right? Tight control, deep pockets, political protection, legal protections, right? Like the Scientology in the United States, is it's a massive organization with money and hierarchy and a record of manipulating its members and like, using the legal system to its advantage, right? But for the most part, at least legally speaking, they operate and call itself a church, right? And in both cases, these two churches are very similar in that respect. Yeah, I mean, beyond that though, once you really get deep into these churches, they urge you to break family ties with people who aren't in the church, and donate heavily is a big, that's a big thing. I mean, it wasn't that what's that documentary by Leah Remini?
There's Going Clear, which was the one that was based off the Lawrence Wright book, and that was made into an HBO documentary. Then Leah I think it was called like Escaped or something. You can easily find it online.
Yeah, I mean, but the TLDR or TLDW on that one is that, like, once you get really deep into this church, they basically get their claws into every aspect of your life, especially your money, right? And they drain you. And that's so in that way, Scientology and this Unification Church are very similar, So, yeah, it was like if Tom Cruise had suddenly, I don't know, given like a keynote speech at the DNC, right, and then like suddenly, an ex-Scientologist, who was like burned by Scientology decided to go and kill him or something like that. Like if there was like deep collusion between those parties, it's a little bit like that. But it was a shock. It was definitely not common,
So what's amazing about this is that, they have so much political capital, but the Cold War has ended.
That's right.
We're going on over 30 years since the Cold War ended.
Right.
The church itself sounds like a relic, and you have to wonder how much pull, because it sounds like a lot, but how much pull do they actually have now?
That's a good question, right? Like how deep did it go then, and how deep is it still now? And, to your point, this is based on a lot of like Cold War inertia. The short answer is like I can't tell. It's hard for me to know, especially not living in Japan, not being deeply involved in that political sphere. But it did begin during the Cold War, and in the 60s and 70s, the LDP they clung to this church because they were useful, like I said before, But I mean, you look at some things like, when was the last time a specific church, like you were saying, when has Obama or some former political statesman, given like basically like an endorsement video to a religion that's got maybe some shady, underpinnings? When was the last time you saw that? So the fact that Abe has this 2021 video praising the church, not only was that the smoking gun for Yamagami, but it also kind of answers your question a little bit, Henry. Like this is the most noteworthy, political person in modern Japanese history, basically saying like, yeah, I endorse these guys. These guys are cool. Like go join their church or whatever,